Welcome to Charter California Edition. I'm Brad Pomerance, and today we are joined by Katcho Achadjian. He is a member of the California State Assembly. And so I want to speak with you about the budget. Who would have thought when you were elected a few years back we'd see surplus? We were facing such dramatic deficits, but we are in surplus now. So what's it like to face a surplus as a member of the Assembly?
Well, hard work pays off.
Right, for sure.
But our concerns haven't changed. Even though 3 years ago, when I came in, we were $26 billion in deficit, right. We have surplus. The important part now is not to forget what has happened to us and put the surplus into a good use, because as long as I've lived here, we've seen the economy every
right.
so often go into the drain. And every time it has gotten worse than the time before. So what we expect in the future, I hope it doesn't happen, but if it does happen, it's going to be worse than what we experience. So if we're not careful what we do with this surplus, sunshine money for rainy days,
right.
Bring down the wall of debt, things of that
right.
nature,
so
then it's going to be worse.
Talk about that, because in some ways it's a bit ironic that when I hear Republican members of the legislature speak, they sound like what the governor is saying, who's a Democrat. The governor seems to be very focused on paying down that wall of debt, creating a rainy day fund. I'm not sure if your colleagues in the legislature on the Democratic side are as committed. Some surely. But, it's a strange alliance now. It was like in the Schwarzenegger years, Mr. Schwarzenegger was aligning with the Democrats. Now it could be that the Republicans are aligning with the Democratic governor.
Well, as we say in our legislation, that this is the best Republican governor we could get times like this.
Very well
when you have the supermajority by the Democrats.
Right.
But it is very interesting. But he makes sense as what he wants to do. And thanks to his commitment to the cause, that he's holding everybody back and disciplining us to a point that we need not to spend the money. And there'll be some struggle back and forth.
Of course.
We look at the budget as is today, it looks good, but when May revise comes along, then that might be something different story, because everybody has their own game to play.
But let's talk about, for example, the rainy day fund, because the governor has proposed creating one. We do have one in place. It was passed a few years back, Proposition 56 or 58, but yet that fund has not been an effective tool.
It's very true, because as we always say, the devil's in the details. Just because we have a fund, but if there are no conditions that apply to the fund, it can be borrowed, it will be taken away, it will be gone, or it's not something solid. So we need to have something in place to say rainy day fund is for rainy days only.
Right.
Just because you're short here for another program, or we're going to start a new program, there's money available in rainy day fund, you should not have access to that fund.
So at this stage, what the governor has proposed is, at a minimum, seeding a rainy day fund, however it's set up, we don't know yet, with about $1.6 billion. Do you think that down payment is great enough?
I don't think so. And even though we think that by the time we're talking about budget for the next fiscal year, it could be somewhere close to $6 billion, I would think we can do a better job bringing that wall of debt down. The reason for that, not because it makes business sense, but if you think how the millions of dollars per day that we pay interest on the wall of debt, how much savings will we also doing at the same time, and how much money we save for taxpayers' future funding?
And you talk about the wall of debt, and that's just bona fide debt. That's not unfunded liabilities.
That's worse. That's why when we say that we have a balanced budget, all what we mean by that we're not spending more than the revenues that are coming in. But in reality, if you look at all the unfunded mandates, the infrastructure needs, the pension funds, probably before we finish this conversation, we could be somewhere around $400 billion.
And I want to continue this part of the conversation when we come back, because it is very important that we recognize the distinction between the debt and the unfunded liabilities. Katcho Achadjian, thank you for joining us. For our viewers on HLN, we thank you for joining us, but we'll be right back with our other viewers on the California channel. So, sir, let's continue the conversation. And I want to speak with you about this notion of unfunded liabilities. As I understand it, the pension funds are underfunded to the tune of over $200 billion.
Correct.
So that's not technically debt, but that's money that we know we're going to have to pay in the future. It's not on the books now. What do we do about that?
We need to be concerned, but not warned to a point that it's disastrous, to a point where if all state employees retire today, we don't have the money to cover their retirement. But that's not going to happen. The other good news that we have, the stock market is doing better. Their investments, the
Right.
return on their investments. So hopefully there is a light at the end of the tunnel, but yet not big of a light for us to have peace. So we need to be more careful as how we deal with pension.
You talk about the stock market, if I can interrupt you, sir. What's interesting to me about the stock market is, of course, we all love to see it rise, but California, the way it taxes, is so reliant on the stock market and capital gains. I'm sure you've heard this. In 2011, and this is before Prop 30 and its increase in taxes on the wealthiest, the top 1% of Californians paid 41% of the income taxes that were brought in. Why is that? Capital gains.
Capital gains.
And so is it time for us to really look at the question of how we're taxing? Because you've said it better than I have, booms and busts. When we bust big.
Yes.
Because we don't get those capital gains that we're bringing in that we're so reliant upon.
And capital gains, the way it happened last year, a lot of people got into capital gains because this year the federal taxes went up. So
Right.
to save money, that was a one-time additional revenues coming in. We got to
Prop
be
30
very,
as
very,
well.
very careful. But what's impressive this year, if you look at the return on folks' taxes, it's on personal income tax. That's very enlightening that we're seeing, again, a little bit of light at the end of the tunnel.
Right.
That's all good news. But if we're not careful, as I said, we'll find ourselves where we were, and this time around it's going to be worse.
But how can we look at the question of tax reform? Because it really, I mean, look, I've been talking about this for years, and it's a bit frustrating because Democrat or Republican, there is an acknowledgement that we have a taxing system that is not working for our state. The booms and busts are too dramatic. We can't continue down this path. So when can we truly look at this question?
The question has to be looked upon every day that we're in session. And what we need to do is not just depend on our additional income or revenues that we're receiving, but we have to maintain our cuts, how to be smart enough not to come up with new programs that will cost us money
Right.
that we don't know where the rest of the money is going to come from. So if we want to run it just like you and I run our own checkbook, it's not going to happen. So we have to be as serious as we can by cutting our expenses, not overspending, not coming up with new programs that we don't know if we can afford in the future just because we have a little extra money today. All of the above has to be part of our decision-making process. If not, the bust is here to happen.
Another significant issue facing our state is the drought, which is quite significant. When you talk to scientists, they talk about this potentially being the worst drought in modern history. I've even seen analysis that say it's the worst drought in centuries. And so we know the governor has asked Californians to conserve. There are no mandatory restrictions. Do you think we're going far enough?
As long as it's not mandatory, it's not far enough. And this is, as you said, the worst ever happened so far because this is the first rain we get over 50 days, never before happened.
Right, without rain.
Without rain. So the drought has too many concerns. One, that our farmers going to suffer, and the cost of food will increase. But
you specifically are most aware of that. You represent the Central Coast.
Beautiful.
And so it's beautiful, but yet very reliant on ag.
Very reliable. It's our number one industry.
Right.
On the other hand, we also have the open space. That means with drought comes dry.
Right.
And that's fire hazard.
Right.
And when we have fire, of course, that's another yet huge expense to the government because of all the overtime we pay to our men and women who put their lives on the line.
So where do we go from here? We know that in the federal Congress, the Democrats and Republicans are fighting amongst the California delegation about the best steps to take. What about here in Sacramento?
It's almost like a political
Football. Right.
And it shouldn't be the case.
Right.
Number one priority, how we deliver water to our farmers.
Right.
Make Delta water priority on our list.
Right.
And see what is the best way and the fast way to
Right.
get the water and hope for more rain.
Okay, well, I want to thank you so much for joining us. He's Katcho Achadjian. When we come back, we'll speak with one of his former colleagues, Bruce Gibson, a member of the Board of Supervisors in San Luis. I'm Brad Pomerance. It's Charter California Edition.
What is the economic impact of the agriculture industry in the state of California annually? 28, 35, 41, or $45 billion? The agriculture industry generates $45 billion annually in the state of California.
Welcome to Charter California Edition. I'm Brad Pomerance, and we are joined by Bruce Gibson. He is the chair of San Luis Obispo County's Board of Supervisors. also a PhD in
Geophysics.
which means
I studied seismology in a previous career.
in a previous career, and so I thought I'd ask you about water. No connection,
Right,
but
yeah.
might as well.
Fair enough.
Yeah,
That's
fair
what
enough. We are in the midst of a drought in the
Historic.
state of California. Historic. Give us a sense of how historic it is to the extent that you know.
Well, I mean, I'm a native Californian,
Yes.
and in my adult experience, we know that the late '70s had a very serious time. We know that the late '80s were another extremely dry time in this state, and by the measures that I have seen, this is worse than that.
The statistics I have seen are quite scary, if I must say. I mean, we have seen snowpack at this level never since 1963. It's the driest measure in Los Angeles County since 1877 when measurements began. I mean, the CEO of the Fresno County Farm Bureau recently said that they are at a borderline catastrophe state.
Right, and I think that is worries that are bubbling up all over this state. And you talk about the snowpack. There
Please.
was a striking picture that I saw. It was actually on the front page of the Fresno Bee,
Okay.
a photograph
I'll try to find
of the snow a year ago and the snow this year, and you can hardly see the snow. It's only at the very highest elevations of the Sierras,
Right.
but the change is dramatic.
For simpletons like myself, why is this happening?
Well,
To the extent we know scientifically.
Sure, we know there's variability year to year in how much precipitation is going to fall, how warm it's going to be, how cold it's going to be. I think that it's clear the consensus science has seen a warming of the globe, and we expect further warming. One of the consequences of that is more extreme weather one way and another.
Could you explain that? Because I think for those that are skeptical about climate science, if they see a massive snowstorm in Atlanta,
Right.
which normally wouldn't get snow,
Right.
they see that as evidence that there is no global
Right.
warming because it's snowing in Atlanta.
Right, so that's looking at a very microscopic level,
Right.
really, in terms of the global climate change. I would say it's very clear among Earth scientists that global warming is real.
But do explain, if you
Why-
can,
how-
the extremes.
That-
Why is it?
How does it get to the extreme? Well, there's more energy trapped in the atmosphere, for one thing. And I'm not a climate
course,
scientist
I
by formal training, but one of the sort of analogies of that's been used in the earth science community is that the warmed atmosphere is a little like an athlete on steroids. So you take, for instance, the home run records that were 73 or whatever the home run record in a single year is, during the steroid age of baseball. It's not to say that this was an unskilled athlete, but under the influence of steroids, there was a chance for this much more extreme performance. So that's an analogy that a lot of climate scientists use to describe the atmosphere right now. We have a warmed atmosphere, a larger amount of energy, and so the complex weather systems are magnified.
And I've heard this cliche that right now we have a stubborn, high-pressure zone off the Pacific coast called the ridiculously resilient ridge.
High pressure ridge,
Right.
parked up over the northwest part of North America, steering the jet stream for the most part around it to the north and keeping it out of
When we come back, I
California.
want to talk more about what we can do to try to be part of the solution behind the drought. For our viewers on HLN, thank you so much for joining us. For our other viewers, we'll be right back with Supervisor Bruce Gibson. So, sir, at this stage, what we know is that Governor Brown has called for Californians to try to reduce their use of water. He's looking for a 20% reduction, but it's voluntary. Do you feel as if that step is bold enough?
Well, I don't think it's necessarily. I don't think it's sufficient. He's exercising the bully pulpit, as well he should. But you mentioned previously this is one of the driest years since 1963.
Right.
Well, recall what the population of California was in 1963. It was about a third, if I remember correctly, what it is today. And so the consequences of these actions is magnified. And so yes, We all need to take personal responsibility. But we're really on red alert status in so many places. We're going to have to do more than just
What's
that.
so interesting about this current drought is one would have thought the region of the state that would be at the most serious risk would be Southern California. Southern California gets most of its water from elsewhere.
Yes.
But yet the Los Angeles region is actually in better shape than Central California and Northern California.
Right.
LA, the city, uses less water now than it did 40 years ago, and yet it has 1 million more people.
Right.
So what did SoCal do right, if you know, that other regions of the state did not?
Well, I'm not intimately familiar with the water purveyors down there and their actions, but we do know that certainly over the last 20 years there's been a lot of move toward reducing the water use of outdoor landscaping.
Right.
Improving water recycling, and so the use of recycled water through what we call purple pipe, because that's the color of the pipe that conveys it, has increased dramatically. And in terms of the cost, it's easier to finance those things where you have a large population than when you have a more rural population.
So let's talk about San Luis Obispo County as an example of a community in Central California.
Right.
I've spoken with some of your colleagues, both on the Board of Supervisors, City Council officials, and it seems as if literally from block to block, that really depends whether that community is suffering drought.
Certainly community to community.
Yeah, I mean, I'm exaggerating to make a point, but what's happening?
Well, it all depends on how jurisdictions have chosen to configure their water supply. So the city of San Luis Obispo has multiple sources of water. The community of Cambria, on the other hand,
in northern San Luis Obispo County,
and up on the north coast in my district, relies on wells in shallow creek aquifers. So if the creeks don't flow, their source of water is going to dry up relatively quickly. And then you have all sorts of situations in between. Cambria, unique because it's so geographically isolated. It doesn't have access to pipelines. It's not near places where water might be brought in and traded. It's going to sort of be out there on its own.
And let's talk about one of the most important industries in Central California as well as the state, and that's agriculture.
Right. Absolutely.
What we may not realize is 80% of the state's water is used by ag.
Right.
And so, I mean, if this drought continues, this is really going to impact all of us.
Absolutely.
Our bread and butter.
Yes.
So give us a sense, sir.
Well, we're looking at the west side of the Central Valley.
Please.
Is all about imported water, and that has been getting increasingly difficult to support over the course of years.
You have a cattle ranch, am I wrong? No.
We do a little bit of grazing.
Little.
I grow oranges.
Okay, the reason I ask is I read that the nation's cattle population, this is the nation, is at a 61-year low.
Yes, and it's very, very difficult time for ranchers in our county because of the lack of rain. The amount of grass on the hillsides is as low as anyone has ever seen it.
And I also learned that one of the key crops in this county is wine, but wine uses a huge amount of water.
It uses a fair amount of water, but there are a whole lot of acres, and so the number of acres times the amount of water is really what's driving an issue that we've talked about before, which is the groundwater levels in the Paso Robles Basin.
So I remember my mom in the 70s telling me that if it's yellow, it's mellow. If it's brown, flush it down. Yeah. So forgive me for using that cliche, but what else can we do other than that?
Back to it. Well, there are communities who put in plain prohibitions of watering outdoor landscaping, and we've seen that. I was in Santa Barbara when I was in high school, and we went through a phase of you just couldn't water your lawn, and that's back. You don't wash down your driveway. You don't wash your car. In the driveway. We absolutely have to start with the personal responsibility to use as little water as we can.
His name is Bruce Gibson, chair of the San Luis Obispo County Board of Supervisors. I'm Brad Pomerance's Charter California edition.
The Delta provides what percent of Southern California's water? 5, 12, 23, or 30%? Southern California receives 30% of its water from the Delta.
Welcome back. It's Charter California edition. I'm Brad Pomerance. Our guest, Caren Ray, she is a member of the Board of Supervisors in San Luis Obispo County. She is running for re-election. That election will be held in June 2014. Correct, June?
Yes, sir.
And so you represent significant portions of South San Luis Obispo County, beautiful areas. And there is a refinery in Napomo, which also houses my favorite steak joint, Jocko's. But that's another conversation. I didn't say that out loud. But in Napomo...
We can plug Napomo businesses all you like.
Exactly. In Napomo, there's a refinery, Phillips 66. Tell us about that before we go into the whole interesting saga behind it.
It is. It's a huge deal. Well, first of all, Phillips 66 has been in several iterations over the years. It's been ConocoPhillips and Union 76. Right. And I was just there recently. They still have the 76 logo. Remember those old 70s?
I absolutely do. But there were little balls on the top of radio antennas.
Yep, exactly. Right. So same company, well, over the years.
Right.
And there is a refinery in western Napomo. It's right on the edge of the mesa, and they refine heavy crude.
Okay, which is what exactly?
It's the heavier versions of it. When you have oil, and I'm not an expert on this,
but
when you refine oil, you start with the heavy crude, and there are various levels to which you can refine that. And gasoline is one of the most refined elements of that heavy crude. Right. Well, at Phillips 66, they only partially refine that, and then they separate out. One of their big byproducts is coke, as in like almost like charcoal.
I know what you're saying, yes.
And so they truck that out, and then they take the partially refined crude and they pipe it out up north.
Got it.
So they've been there for 50, 60 years. They employ somewhere around 200 head of household jobs in South County.
That's real.
And about half of those live in San Luis Obispo County. I just asked them that question last week.
Because you're close to the border of Santa Barbara County, so of course they may come from Santa Maria or Guadalupe or whatever it is.
Exactly.
But what's interesting is there's just a general change in the way that the crude is getting to Phillips 66. Explain that element.
And that's happening all over North America. So really what's happening is most or all of what Phillips 66's raw material was coming from was offshore in Santa Barbara. But that product is declining. And there's a boom going on nationwide where there's a lot of crude oil being refined or being produced around the nation.
I think about in North Dakota, there's a lot of that going on.
And Canada.
Canada, right.
And so there are not pipelines in place that can send this around for distribution, so they're distributing it by rail now. Now, so Phillips' project that they're bringing forward right now is to build a rail spur, which is a little bit like a cul-de-sac. You can think of that.
Okay.
So it's just a little spur that comes off to the side, and so that they can begin to receive their raw material that they will refine via rail car. So that's the essence of the project.
So right now there is a rail that goes up the coast, but it doesn't reach Napomo, obviously.
No, it goes right through, and it goes up from Santa Barbara all the way up and out of North County.
Oh, but I understand what you're saying. But it doesn't reach the refinery, obviously.
It goes right next to it. They do have some cars that can go on, but not enough to accommodate a full car. So what they're proposing is, forgive me, I don't remember the length of the spur, but it's enough to bring in 80 cars.
Okay.
And they're proposing a maximum of 5 80-car trains per week capacity at the refinery. And I want to underscore that Phillips 66 has said they're not going to up their production. They're only changing the input, not
delivery.
The output.
But could there be more jobs as a result?
No, they've said there's no more jobs, there's no more water usage. But where the difficulty lies, and why I wanted to come here and talk about it, is to make sure that the public is aware of what there are really significant potential impacts.
And that's what we're going to talk about when we come back, because it is a pivotal issue for the entire county of San Luis Obispo. For our viewers on HLN, we thank you for joining us. For our other viewers, we'll be right back. So, Supervisor, let's continue. So let's continue our conversation and talk about this element of the impact on the county, because as you said, no more oil's coming or crude is coming in, but it is going to change the way that this crude is delivered. So explain that.
Well, and right now we're going through the environmental impact process, and
which is lengthy.
It is lengthy, although they're on an accelerated time frame. Now, they can't accelerate the public process, but they can accelerate how much time it takes to just do the paperwork.
I understand.
And so they've just closed the public comment period, and they received about 1,000 inquiries on this. It was huge, coming from southern San Luis County, my district. And so again, I'm trying to get this word out.
Do you know how they came in?
Oh yeah, most of it's coming in via email. Most of it went to my office as well.
Oh, but were it positive or negative?
Well, it's in this stage, it's about the environmental concerns, and the
Right.
environmental concerns are wide. And so some of them include the actual safety of the rail cars themselves.
Fair.
This is a nationwide issue, not so much,
Of
not
course.
just a San Luis County issue, but the safety of the rail cars is one. The onloading and offloading, that's where you have the most potential for spillage or for fire, and so there's issues with that. There's issues with noise for the neighbors. That rail spur is going to get very close to one of the large developments in Napomo, so the residents there are worried about that.
And you have not taken a position at this stage.
I have not. I am still
Right.
and it wouldn't be appropriate for me to before
Sure.
it comes through its environmental process. So I've read the draft EIR. The final EIR should be coming out for the Planning Commission in April-ish.
Right.
And then to the Board of Supervisors, most likely on appeal, and probably both sides will appeal. So it will most likely
Whatever the decision is.
most likely.
So that's the process. Literally, 5 of you will decide whether to approve this rail spur.
Yes.
And so,
Yeah.
and then when you say there's an appeal, what is that?
Well, if at planning level, if let's say Phillips 66 gets their approval, they
Right.
pass through planning. My anticipation is that the community or the
Right.
environmental groups will appeal up to the board, and if they don't get it at planning, my anticipation would be Phillips will appeal it up to the board.
Okay, but once the board decides, that's it. Decision made. I mean, I guess technically. anyway, yeah.
As with any land
Right.
use project. Now, there's also some complications because railways are federally regulated.
Right.
There's some we're not sure yet, and county council is dealing.
Right.
It's our legal team is dealing with how much discretion we have over which parts of the project, and those questions have not been answered yet either. But I want to just alert people who are watching now.
Yes.
Please contact the Board of Supervisors.
Yes.
Please contact my office and let us know how you feel about that. And if you want to see the draft EIR, you can go to slowplanning.org, and it's there, and you can educate yourselves or ask me. Come to one of the town hall meetings that I've been
But
doing.
now let me ask you, I know obviously you're not an employee of Phillips 66, but why not increase capacity and create more jobs?
Well, they just in 2011, 2 years
Right.
ago, well, 3 years ago.
Well,
now,
you're right, yes.
In 2011, they did have a project come through where they did increase capacity. They
Right.
increased it by 10%.
Okay.
So this is a different project. And also there's a piece of this project that is a remnant of the last project. That
see.
last project required them to investigate coastal access. That's not necessarily something Phillips 66 is pushing, but it's something that the Coastal Commission required them to do as part of the 2011 permit. So they did up capacity. They did get that approved. Now this is a separate project,
Sure.
so that they can augment what raw
See,
materials
the
they're bringing
concern for some, and of course we understand the environmental concerns, if this is not approved, could this plant start to lose capacity and therefore lose jobs? Because
in
as you
theory,
described,
over time.
right.
In theory, over time, yes, they could. And it's hard. I'm not.
No,
I
no,
don't
I
work
got
for
it,
Phillips,
yeah.
but in theory, yeah. Because if the nature of the business is changing, then it would be obviously Phillips 66 wants to stay competitive, and this is what I'm told is that this is about them staying competitive.
You mentioned water, so I got to ask you.
Please do.
What's the impact on water? We're in a drought right now, so I think you said that there is no impact.
There is no impact to water, and the way it's been explained to me is that there's some sort of process in the refining process where they use some sort of vacuum. I don't know.
Right. Yes.
And the water that they use, which is significant, they use about 1,200 acre-feet per year. It's huge.
Okay.
But that powers the
Right.
machinery. So because there's no change in output,
I
it's
understand.
the same power that they've always been using. So the only impact to water that I know of
Right.
to this is they're adding 2 bathrooms.
Okay.
So
Okay.
there is no impact to water. Now the argument, of course, is that if they weren't there, they wouldn't be impacting water. So
But they're there.
Right, they're there,
Okay.
and they're a member of our community. So
Her name is Caren Ray. She is a member of the Board of Supervisors in San Luis Obispo County. She is running for re-election in June 2014. My name is Brad Pomerance. Thanks for watching Charter California Edition.